My name is Sandra Mulligan. I am 65 years old, a widow, and the mother of a son I once believed would never forget me. But on the night of his promotion dinner at the Willow Crest, I discovered how far he had drifted. The moment I reached the long table dressed in white linen, I noticed something piercing. 2 seats only, one for my son Daniel, one for his wife Samantha, none for me. I stood there frozen, waiting for someone to notice. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his voice loud enough for the entire hall. "Go eat outside with the beggars." Laughter nearby stopped. Samantha lifted her wine glass, her lips curved in a mocking smile. "Sandra, not everyone belongs at this table," she added softly, her words dripping with cruelty. My chest burned. My hands trembled. But I had learned long ago how to hide a shaking heart. I straightened my back, my smile thin but steady. I caught the eye of a young server standing nearby, unsure whether to intervene. When he stepped close, I whispered a few words into his ear. His eyes widened, then he gave a sharp nod and hurried toward the kitchen. Daniel smirked, certain I had asked for a chair. To him, it was proof of weakness, a moment to mock later. Samantha tilted her head, savoring what she thought was my humiliation. Instead, I placed my small leather clutch on the table with a firm click. Slowly, I looked at them both, my voice calm but carrying across the room. "Fine," I said. "If someone has to leave tonight, it will not be me." For one still second, everything froze. Glasses paused midair, forks hovered above plates, even the piano stopped. Daniel's smirk faltered into confusion. He leaned forward, his tone sharp. "What are you even saying, Mom? This is my night, my dinner, you don't belong here." I held his gaze, my smile unshaken. Inside, my heart pounded. But I knew tonight Daniel was about to learn a truth he never imagined. Long before that night at the Willow Crest, my life had already been tested by hardship. I was 40 when my husband, Patrick, died suddenly in a car accident. Overnight I became a widow, left with Daniel, still a teenager, and debts from the small shop we had tried to run together. I remember standing at his graveside, the cold earth heavy in my hands, wondering how I would go on. I wanted to collapse, but Daniel's young face forced me to stand tall. If I gave up, he would lose everything. So I worked, and worked again. In the mornings, I sat at the front desk of a small law office, answering phones and filing papers. At night, I cleaned offices for an accounting firm, the smell of bleach clinging to my clothes. On weekends, I washed dishes at an Italian restaurant, my hands cracked from soap and water. There were weeks I slept only a few hours each night. At dawn, I whispered to myself, "Get up, Sandra. Don't stop." At first I thought I was only surviving, but slowly I realized I was learning. At the restaurant, I studied how the chef managed his kitchen, how servers charmed even the most difficult guests, how the owner handled invoices and suppliers. I soaked up everything like a student, storing it away though I didn't yet know why. Meanwhile, Daniel grew. He wanted what every boy wanted: new sneakers, money for school trips, the chance to fit in. Too often I had to say no. The hardest choice was selling my wedding ring, the last keepsake of Patrick, to pay Daniel's first year of college tuition. That night, I cried silently into my pillow, but the next morning when Daniel hugged me and whispered, "I promise I'll make you proud, Mom," the pain felt lighter. When he was accepted to a prestigious university, I nearly collapsed from pride. At orientation, I clapped until my hands ached, watching him step into a world far brighter than the one I knew. I thought my sacrifices had tied us closer, but I didn't see it yet. The more he climbed into that polished new life, the more the distance between us quietly began to grow. At first I told myself the changes were normal. College was demanding, and Daniel was surrounded by people whose lives looked nothing like ours, but the small signs were difficult to ignore. During his first year, I visited his dorm with a bag of homemade food. I thought he would be proud to share it, but his smile faltered when he saw me in the lobby. He took the bag quickly, lowered his voice, and whispered, "Mom, maybe don't come when my friends are around. They don't need to know what you do for work." The words cut deeper than he realized. I forced a smile, but as I walked back to the bus stop, I felt like my chest was being squeezed by invisible hands. Years passed. Daniel graduated with honors, secured a position at a large corporation, and rose quickly. He bought a sleek car, a tailored wardrobe, and eventually a beautiful home in an upscale suburb. When he married Samantha, a woman from a wealthy family, the distance between us widened further. At their wedding, I sat at a round table tucked near the back, Surrounded by glittering chandeliers and guests who laughed as if they had never known hardship, I wore my best emerald dress, but it was modest compared to the designer gowns around me. I caught the way Samantha's eyes flicked toward me, polite but cold, as though I didn't belong in her world. After the wedding, invitations slowed. Calls came less often. When I did hear Daniel's voice, he sounded rushed, distracted, always in another world. One evening at a company party, I overheard him introducing me to a colleague. "My mother's retired now," he said lightly. "She lives quietly on a small pension." He didn't mention the years I worked 3 jobs, or the sacrifices I made to put him where he stood. He said it with a smile, as if my story was something to hide. The realization struck me like ice. My son wasn't just drifting away, he was erasing me from the version of his life he wanted others to see. The last piece of proof came when I offered to cook dinner at my apartment. Daniel hesitated before saying, "Mom, maybe it's easier if we meet at a restaurant instead." Easier. That word echoed through me like an insult. I didn't argue. I let him have his way. But that night, as I set 2 untouched plates back into the cupboard, I understood the truth. The son who once promised to make me proud was now ashamed of where he came from, and in his pride he had begun to see me not as his mother but as his burden. That night at the Willow Crest was meant to celebrate Daniel's promotion. Samantha had chosen the venue: crystal chandeliers, velvet chairs, waiters in pressed uniforms. Everything screamed of wealth and exclusivity. When I arrived, I felt the weight of the stares. Women in silk dresses glanced at my simple gown. Men in polished shoes looked past me as though I didn't exist. Still, I held my head high. I wasn't there to impress anyone, I was there for my son. But when I reached their table, the truth was laid bare: 2 chairs only, none for me. I waited, thinking it must be an oversight, but Daniel's voice shattered that hope. "Go eat outside with the beggars," he growled, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Laughter from other tables dimmed. Samantha lifted her glass, her smile sharp. "Don't be offended, Sandra. Not everyone can belong at a table like this." The humiliation seared through me. Every sacrifice I had made, every sleepless night, seemed erased in that single moment, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I signaled a young waiter and leaned close, whispering words only he could hear. His eyes widened, then he nodded quickly and disappeared into the kitchen. Daniel smirked, certain I had asked for a chair. Samantha leaned back, enjoying what she thought was my defeat. Instead, I set my leather clutch on the table with a deliberate thud. My voice was calm, but it carried across the hushed dining room. "Fine, if someone has to leave tonight, it will not be me." For a beat, silence thickened. Guests leaned forward in their seats, forks suspended, waiting to see what would unfold. Daniel narrowed his eyes. "What are you saying, Mom? This is my dinner, you don't belong here." I met his glare without flinching. "Then why did you invite me?" He laughed bitterly. "To show you the difference, to remind you of your place. Look around, Mom. This is success, and you're just a woman in a second-hand dress living off scraps." Samantha's voice slid in, syrupy but cutting. "He's only being honest, Sandra. You should be grateful he even let you come." I let the sting wash over me, then smiled faintly. They thought they had humiliated me beyond repair. But what they didn't know was that the power in this room wasn't theirs to control. The waiter returned with a sealed envelope, placing it gently by my hand. I rested my palm on it, steady as stone. Daniel frowned, sensing something he couldn't name. I looked at both of them, my smile unwavering. Tonight, the game was only beginning. The envelope sat beneath my hand like a stone dropped into still water. Around us, the restaurant seemed to lean closer, waiting. Daniel's smirk wavered, but Samantha laughed sharply, determined to brush it off. "What is this, some dramatic stunt?" she sneered. I didn't answer her. Instead, I nodded to the young waiter, who stepped aside as another figure approached. Oscar Bennett, the manager of the Willow Crest. His face was steady, his eyes respectful. "Good evening, Mrs. Mulligan," he said warmly. Gasps rose around the room. Samantha blinked, confused. Daniel stiffened. "You know my mother?" Oscar nodded simply. "We've known each other for many years." Before Daniel could question further, another voice carried from the entrance. A tall man in a tailored suit walked in, his presence commanding immediate attention. Raymond Clark, chairman of the restaurant group. "Mrs. Mulligan," he greeted with a respectful bow of his head. "It's an honor to see you again." The whispers swelled like a tide. Guests leaned forward, astonished. Daniel looked from me to Mr. Clark, his face draining of color. "Mom, what is going on?" I slid the envelope across the table. His hand shook as he opened it, pulling out document after document, ownership certificates, contracts stamped with seals, each bearing my signature. Daniel's breath caught. This can't be real." Raymond Clark's voice cut through his disbelief. "It is real. Without Mrs. Mulligan, this restaurant wouldn't exist. She has been a quiet investor and supporter for years. We owe much of our success to her." Samantha snatched a page, scanning it before scoffing weakly. "These must be fake. Some setup." Oscar stepped forward, his voice firm. "I witnessed her sign those papers myself. They are genuine." The room fell into stunned silence. I leaned closer, my voice even but edged with steel. "Daniel, tonight you stood in front of everyone and told me I didn't deserve a chair. Do you understand now whose table this really is?" Daniel collapsed back into his seat, his face pale, his pride shattering. Samantha's mocking smile vanished, replaced by tight fear. I set my glass of water down gently, my eyes steady on my son. Respect isn't something you buy with a bottle of wine. It's something you give or lose forever. Around us, the room erupted in applause, the sound rolling like thunder. For the first time that night, it wasn't Daniel or Samantha commanding attention. It was me. The applause faded, but the tension at our table remained sharp as glass. Daniel buried his face in his hands, unable to meet my eyes. Samantha sat stiff, her knuckles white against her wine glass. I reached into my purse and placed a second envelope on the table. This one was thicker, heavier. Daniel's head lifted, his eyes wide with dread. "For years I began calmly. I kept your name in my will. Even when you forgot me, even when you let arrogance drive you, I still believed you might change. But after tonight, that belief is broken." Gasps spread across the room as I slid the papers forward. Inside lay an interim will, stamped and notarized. I nodded toward the man stepping up beside me, David Morris, my attorney. "These documents are valid," David said firmly. "Mrs. Mulligan's assets will now be held in suspension. No distribution will be made unless specific conditions are met." Daniel's voice cracked. "Mom, what conditions?" I looked at him long and hard. 6, each one a lesson you've forgotten. I raised a finger. "First, you and Samantha will volunteer at a nursing home every weekend for 1 year. Not for show, but real service, listening, helping, understanding the loneliness of old age." A second finger. "Second, you will move out of your luxury home and live in a modest apartment. With a budget of $4,000 a month, enough to live, not to flaunt." Daniel's mouth fell open. Samantha's eyes widened in outrage, but I pressed on. "Third, you will work at one of my restaurants, not as a manager, not as an owner's son. As a server, carry trays, greet guests, handle complaints, learn humility." Whispers rippled across the dining room. "Fourth," I continued, "you will write 2 apology letters, one to your company and one to the local newspaper. Public words to admit your mistakes. Fifth, you will visit me every week, not to check a box but to sit, talk, and listen. Learn to see me as more than a shadow." Finally, I opened my hand. "Sixth, the most important, if either of you slips, if you mock, disrespect, or retreat into arrogance, everything ends. The inheritance goes to charity without question." The room went silent. Samantha's voice broke the air, high and brittle. "This isn't fair. It's impossible." I smiled faintly, "Then walk away. But if you want a future, you'll earn it." Daniel's eyes shone with tears. "Mom, I'll do it. I swear." I shook my head softly. "Don't swear, Daniel. Show me." The very next week, Daniel and Samantha moved out of their pristine suburban house. I stood quietly as movers carried away their boxes. Samantha clutched a small suitcase, her lips pressed tight. Daniel locked the door one last time, his shoulders slumped. Their new apartment was modest, narrow stairs, peeling paint, a tiny living room that barely fit a worn sofa. Samantha whispered under her breath, "How are we supposed to live like this?" Daniel didn't answer. He simply sat on the couch, staring at the cracked walls. Then came their first shifts at Riverbend Grill, a mid-tier restaurant in my group. I chose it deliberately, busy and unglamorous. Daniel arrived in a white shirt and black apron, stiff as a soldier. His first table was an elderly couple. He forgot the hot water for their tea and returned red-eared to correct the mistake. Guests snickered, but he bowed and apologized again. I watched from a corner booth, my heart heavy yet hopeful. Samantha was placed at the host stand, a position requiring patience. When a family complained about the wait, her temper flared for a moment, but she forced a brittle smile and managed to keep her voice even. By the end of the night, both of them leaned against the wall, drenched in sweat. "It's harder than I thought," Daniel admitted, his voice low. "I never realized how much effort it takes to serve." I nodded. Exactly. Respect begins here. On weekends, the nursing home became their second classroom. At first, they looked uncomfortable, surrounded by wheelchairs and quiet rooms filled with loneliness. But slowly, they began to engage. Daniel played chess with an older gentleman, losing again and again but listening patiently to his stories. Samantha sat beside a woman who loved to knit, fumbling with yarn until both of them laughed together. Yet the road wasn't smooth. One Saturday, Samantha left early, saying she had errands. Later, I discovered she had simply gone shopping. Another time, Daniel lost his temper at the restaurant when young customers mocked him, snapping back before catching himself. When I confronted them, my voice was colder than they had ever heard. "This is exactly why you're here. Every time you lash out or walk away, you show me that the lesson hasn't sunk in." They lowered their heads. For once, there were no excuses. Only silence. I left them with a warning. The conditions were never meant to be easy. If they were, you wouldn't learn a thing. Weeks turned into months. At first, I expected Daniel and Samantha to stumble again, but slowly, something began to shift. Oscar, the manager at Riverbend Grill, called me one evening. "Mrs. Mulligan, I thought you should know." After Daniel lost his temper that day, he came back to the staff room and apologized in front of everyone. He admitted he was wrong. That's not easy for a man like him. His words stayed with me. My son, who once scoffed at humility, was learning to bow his head. Samantha, too, surprised me. She began taking on tasks beyond her role, busying tables, folding napkins, even polishing glasses when the rush hit. A young hostess told me she asked me how to deal with angry guests. She actually listened. That small detail mattered more than she realized. At the nursing home, residents noticed changes as well. One woman pulled me aside. "Your boy sits with Mr. Martin every week, playing chess. He still loses every game, but he listens with patience. That's rare." Another resident added, "Your daughter-in-law, at first she wouldn't lift a finger. But lately she helps me knit and reads poems with me. She's different now." I kept my heart guarded, but hope flickered. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just fear of losing money, it was the beginning of true change. One evening, I visited their small apartment unannounced. Samantha opened the door in simple clothes, her hair tied back, no trace of the glamorous woman who once mocked me. She smiled, not forced, but almost genuine. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. Inside, Daniel sat on the floor surrounded by papers. When he saw me, he scrambled to his feet. "Mom, I'm working on the apology letter to my company. I want it to be right." I read over the clumsy, heartfelt sentences. For the first time in years, I saw sincerity instead of arrogance. Dinner was simple pasta, vegetables, roasted chicken. Samantha set the plates down and said, "I learned this recipe from one of the ladies at the nursing home." She was so happy to share it. As I ate, something stirred in me. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was the faint warmth of possibility. That night, I sat by my window and thought, real change doesn't happen with speeches. It shows in small actions, repeated over time. And for the first time, I believed Daniel and Samantha might truly be learning. By late autumn, the air outside grew sharp and cold. Leaves scattered across the streets, and in my small apartment, I prepared for the hardest conversation yet. For months I had been watching Daniel and Samantha from a distance, collecting notes from managers, staff, and residents at the nursing home. Tonight, it was time to face them with the truth. They arrived quietly, without the arrogance that once followed them everywhere. Daniel twisted a napkin in his hands as he sat at my old wooden table. Samantha kept her eyes low, her shoulders tight. I placed the folder of reports on the table. "I'd been keeping track," I said, "not to catch your mistakes, but to see if the change is real." Slowly, I read from the notes. Daniel apologized to guests when he was wrong, even when it embarrassed him. Samantha stayed late at the restaurant to help staff without being asked. At the nursing home, residents say you listen, play chess, knit, even read poems. You've come far. Silence followed. Then I asked the question that mattered most. But tell me, are you changing because of the will or because of who you want to be? The wind outside whistled through the window frame. Daniel took a shaky breath. At first, I did it out of fear. I didn't want to lose everything. But as time passed, I realized how ashamed I felt of the way I treated you, Mom. I don't want to be that man anymore, whether I inherit or not. Samantha spoke next, her voice softer than I had ever heard. I thought you wanted revenge, Sandra. But at the nursing home, I saw loneliness in people's eyes, the same loneliness I once saw in yours. I realized I'd ignored it. I don't know if I can ever make it right, but I want to try. Their words didn't erase the pain, but for the first time I felt something crack inside me. Not full forgiveness, but the door of my heart opened halfway. I leaned back, folding my hands. I'm no saint who forgets everything, but I won't cling to hatred either. From now on, the will is divided. A portion will go to charity, a portion to a fund for mothers abandoned like me, and the rest to you if you continue to live as you've begun. Daniel lifted his eyes, hope flickering. Samantha nodded quickly, tears brimming. I let out a long breath. This isn't punishment anymore. It's a second chance. Whether you hold on to it is up to you. Winter came heavy that year. Snow blanketed the streets, and the city seemed hushed under its weight. I sat at my wooden desk with a final folder of papers before me. David Morris, my attorney, waited across the table, his pen poised. Mrs. Mulligan, he said gently, it's time to finalize the will. How do you want to divide it? I thought of the long road Daniel and Samantha had walked, the arrogance, the stumbles, and the first signs of genuine change. They had worked hard, but scars remained. The memory of that night at the Willow Crest, when my son told me to eat outside with beggars, would never vanish. Some wounds stay written into the heart. I signed the papers with a steady hand. The will was divided into 3. A large share to charity, another to a fund for mothers abandoned by their children, and the rest to Daniel and Samantha, conditional on the lives they chose to lead. Later that evening, I lit a candle and recorded my final journal entry. The flickering flame cast soft light across the room as I spoke into the camera. Life never runs out of hurt, I began. But what matters is how we face it. I could have stayed silent, swallowed the humiliation, and let it harden inside me. Instead, I chose to speak, to set conditions, to give a chance for change. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, it means creating a path where growth is possible. I paused, my voice low and steady. To anyone listening who has faced betrayal from your own family, remember, your worth is not defined by how others treat you. It is defined by how you stand when the world tries to push you down. Dignity is not something anyone can take away. I leaned closer, letting the words carry. If this story touched you, I ask one thing: share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me if you've walked a similar road. I will read every word. And if you want to continue on this journey with me, please like, share, and subscribe. Together we can make sure no one feels alone in their struggle. I closed the journal, the candle flame steady. For the first time in many years, my heart felt light. My worth was no longer hidden or doubted, it was spoken, claimed, and carried into the future. This was not just the end of my story, it was the beginning of living on my own terms.